The warm afternoon air in Cleveland, Ohio, was interrupted by hurried steps heading toward the downtown bank. The usual hustle and bustle of cars and pedestrians seemed unaware of the presence of a simple man, wearing a worn straw hat and muddy boots, carrying a leather briefcase marked by time. John Matthews, a 52-year-old farmer, took a deep breath before crossing the glass doors. Inside the bank, the atmosphere was formal. People in tailored suits spoke discreetly, while a teller called the next customers. John stopped at the reception desk, straightened his posture, and asked respectfully, "I'd like to speak with the manager." The receptionist gave him an assessing look before pointing to an office in the back. He followed the directions, feeling the furtive glances of some customers on his simple clothes and the earthy smell that seemed to linger, even in the city. Mark Reynolds, the bank manager, was an ambitious man in his early 40s, whose career relied on results and maintaining a select clientele. When he saw John enter, he frowned slightly, but quickly recovered, offering a formal smile. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" Mark asked, not hiding his quick appraisal of John's condition. "Good afternoon, sir. My name is John Matthews, and I own a farm about 20 miles from here. I'm here because I need a loan," John explained while opening the briefcase to show some documents. Mark maintained his smile, but his tone became sharper. "I see. Let's analyze your situation. But I must warn you, Mr. Matthews, that our criteria are very strict." John nodded, undeterred. He knew he didn't look like a promising investor, but believed he had something valuable: years of hard work and the confidence of someone who trusts their cause. He sat carefully in the chair across the desk and began explaining his proposal. "Mr. Reynolds, I've been struggling to maintain the farm that's been in my family for 3 generations. This loan would help improve production. With a new irrigation system, I can triple the harvest next year." As John spoke, Mark's gaze drifted toward the window, feigning interest while drumming his fingers on the desk. When John finished, Mark leaned forward, adjusting his tie. "Mr. Matthews, I understand your situation, but banks look for clients who can offer solid guarantees. Agriculture is a high-risk sector at the moment." He paused, gauging John's reaction before continuing. "I can't approve this type of loan without substantial collateral." John remained silent for a moment, feeling the weight of the words. He retrieved an envelope from the briefcase and handed it to Mark. "Here are the farm's deeds. I'm willing to put it up as collateral." The proposal made Mark raise an eyebrow. He took the papers, flipped through them quickly, and without looking at John, stood up from his chair. "Mr. Matthews, I'll take a look. But frankly, I think this isn't the type of operation our bank is interested in." Before John could respond, Mark left the room. Minutes passed before he returned, accompanied by 2 security guards. The atmosphere was tense and hostile. "Mr. Matthews, I think it's best we end this conversation here." Mark gestured to the guards. "Escort the gentleman to the exit." John was stunned, unable to comprehend such humiliation. He stood slowly, picked up his briefcase, but not before feeling one of the guards press a hand on his shoulder. "Let's go, sir. We don't want any trouble," one of the men said firmly. The scene caught the attention of other customers. A woman whispered something to her husband, who shook his head in disapproval. John left the bank, eyes fixed on the ground, fighting back tears that threatened to fall. He had never been treated this way. Outside, he paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and looked up at the sky. A mixture of shame and frustration consumed him, but he knew he couldn't give up. The farm needed him, and he had to find another solution. John Matthews walked slowly down the sidewalk, gripping his old briefcase tightly. Each step felt heavier, not because of the distance, but due to the weight of the disdain he had just faced. In the distance, the busy streets of Cleveland seemed oblivious to the whirlwind of thoughts running through his mind. At that moment, he didn't realize he was being watched. Inside the bank, Emily Carter, a young credit analyst recently hired, had witnessed the scene. Something about John's expression as he left made her pause her typing. Curiosity got the better of her. She grabbed her bag and quickly followed him to the door, ignoring the suspicious look from manager Mark Reynolds. Outside, she spotted John leaning against a post, clutching the briefcase to his chest. His breathing was heavy, but his eyes hadn't lost their determined spark. "Sir, Emily called out, approaching cautiously. John looked up, surprised. For a moment, he thought she was just another customer leaving the bank, but then he noticed the ID badge hanging around her neck. "I saw what happened in there. It was unfair." Emily hesitated but continued. "I couldn't help but overhear about your farm. May I ask why you need the loan?" John blinked, confused, but the sincerity in the young woman's eyes encouraged him. He quickly explained his situation, trying not to delve too deeply. "My farm has been struggling since the last drought. Without the irrigation system, I can't produce enough to cover the costs. But with the loan, I'd be able to triple my harvest and get back on my feet." Emily listened intently, absorbing every word. She knew the banking system could be cold and calculating, but what she had just witnessed felt like more than a simple rejection. It was humiliation. "What if I could help?" she asked, her hesitation evident. John frowned, skeptical. "How? You work for the bank, don't you?" "Yes, but not everyone at the bank is like Mark." Emily glanced around to make sure no one was watching. "Listen, I can't promise anything, but I know some local organizations that provide microloans for farmers. Maybe they can help." Hope lit up in John's eyes, but he remained cautious. After all, so many doors had been slammed in his face over the past few months. "Why would you do this for me?" he asked. Emily offered a small smile. "Because I grew up on a farm. My dad faced similar struggles, and I know what it's like to feel like no one's willing to help. Give me a chance, Mr. Matthews." Reluctantly, but with no better options, John agreed. Emily wrote down her phone number and promised to contact him soon. As she walked away, he stood still, watching the young woman disappear among the tall buildings. For the first time in weeks, he felt there might still be a way out. In the following days, Emily dedicated her evenings to searching for alternatives. She called farmer support organizations, sent emails, and even visited some institutions during her lunch break. Meanwhile, John returned to his routine on the farm, tending to every detail with dedication. But the shadow of uncertainty still loomed over him. One Tuesday morning, while inspecting the fences, John's phone rang. It was Emily. "Mr. Matthews, I found something," she said excitedly. "There's an organization called Harvest Hope that provides financing for small farmers. I've scheduled a meeting for you with their director tomorrow in Columbus." John was speechless. He knew Columbus was over 150 miles from his farm, but the possibility of a new beginning was enough to make him hit the road without a second thought. The next day, upon arriving at Harvest Hope's headquarters, John was greeted by Gregory Shaw, a robust man with a grey beard and a welcoming smile. Emily was already there, waiting for him in the lobby. "Mr. Matthews, it's a pleasure to meet you," Gregory said, shaking John's hand firmly. "Emily told me a bit about your story. Let's talk." The meeting began, and John once again presented his proposal with the same passion he had taken to the bank. The difference was that Gregory actually listened. He asked questions, took notes, and seemed genuinely interested in finding a solution. After nearly an hour, Gregory finally spoke. "Mr. Matthews, your dedication to the farm is evident, and we like to support people like you. We can offer the financing, but on one condition. We need guarantees to prove your repayment ability." John nodded, already expecting this requirement. "I have a detailed plan, and if necessary, I can offer my farm as collateral." Gregory smiled, satisfied. "Excellent. We'll review the documents and get back to you soon." As he left the building alongside Emily, John felt a wave of relief. For the first time in a long while, it seemed like the future was within reach. He turned to Emily, his voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you. Without your help, I wouldn't even be here." Emily shook her head. "We haven't achieved anything yet, Mr. Matthews, but I'm confident everything will work out." What John didn't know as he drove back home was that the bank manager, Mark Reynolds, had discovered his meeting with Harvest Hope. Furious with Emily's initiative, Mark was planning a retaliation that could jeopardize everything. The following days were a mix of anticipation and unease for John Matthews. Back on his farm, he dedicated himself to work, but his thoughts frequently drifted to the meeting with Harvest Hope. Emily's support and Gregory's openness had reignited a glimmer of hope in his heart. Yet, as John well knew, nothing in life came without challenges. Meanwhile, inside the bank in Cleveland, the atmosphere was far from calm. Mark Reynolds had received an internal notification. Emily Carter had been flagged for using the bank's time and resources to assist a client outside traditional protocols. The news reached Mark through an anonymous report, but he was certain someone from his own team had tipped him off. In the conference room, Mark confronted Emily, his voice dripping with sarcasm and authority. "So you think you're a hero, don't you, Emily?" He tossed a copy of the notification onto the table. "You think you can go around helping people like Mr. Matthews while compromising our time and resources?" Emily maintained her composure, though she could feel the weight of his accusations. "I didn't compromise any of the bank's resources, Mr. Reynolds. I used my personal time to help someone in need." "Personal time?" Mark chuckled, shaking his head. "Don't kid yourself, Emily. This is not your place, and if you keep this up, you might find yourself without a job." Emily felt a chill run down her spine, but her determination did not waver. "With all due respect, Mr. Reynolds, I believe our job should be to help people like him. Isn't that why we're here?" Mark stared at her, his face flushed with anger. "Consider this your warning. This is a bank, not a charity. Next time you step out of line, there won't be another warning." He leaned forward, a fake smile spreading across his face. "And about Mr. Matthews, I doubt he'll get very far." When Emily left the room, she felt the threat hanging over her like a storm cloud. But instead of backing down, it only strengthened her resolve to continue helping John. On the farm, John was finishing feeding the horses when his phone rang. It was Gregory Shaw from Harvest Hope. "Mr. Matthews, I have good news," Gregory began. "I've reviewed your documents and we're ready to move forward. The loan has been approved, and the funds will be available within 10 days. John was speechless. His hand trembled as he held the phone. That's incredible. Thank you so much, Mr. Shaw. This means everything to me." "Thank Emily, too. She passionately advocated for your case. We wish you great success in your project," Gregory said before hanging up. Tears of relief streamed down John's face. He had spent months facing closed doors, but finally things were changing. However, his joy was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle approaching. He turned to see a black pickup truck pulling up in front of his house. Mark Reynolds stepped out, wearing a smile that seemed more like a provocation. John frowned, confused. "What are you doing here?" John asked, trying to remain calm. "Just stopping by to check on you, Mr. Matthews," Mark said, adjusting his tie as if preparing to deliver a speech. "I heard you were in Columbus meeting with Harvest Hope." John didn't respond, but the tension in the air was palpable. "Let me save you some time," Mark continued. "That loan approval, it won't last. I have enough connections to make your life a living hell, Matthews. If I were you, I'd give up on this plan." John stepped forward, facing Mark. "I don't know why you're doing this, but my farm is all I have." "I'm not giving up." Mark smirked, a dark expression in his eyes. "Good luck with that," he said before getting back into his truck and driving off, leaving John both furious and alarmed. The next day, Emily met John at a cafe downtown to discuss the next steps. He told her about Mark's visit, and Emily looked visibly concerned. "That's unacceptable," she said, gripping her coffee cup. "He's crossing professional and personal boundaries." "What should I do, Emily?" John asked, his voice heavy with frustration. She took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. "We need to document everything. If he tries anything, we'll have evidence to protect ourselves. But above all, don't let him intimidate you. You're close to achieving what you need." John nodded but still felt vulnerable. However, Emily was determined not to let Mark win. As the days passed, John prepared for the implementation of the irrigation system. But as if his challenges weren't enough, he began noticing small problems. Broken fences, missing tools, and even rumors spreading in the community about his supposed imminent bankruptcy. Something was clearly wrong, and John suspected Mark was behind it. The tension was mounting, and John knew he would need all the help he could get to overcome the obstacles. He was determined to protect his farm and his dignity, but what he didn't know was that an unexpected event was about to change everything. The morning began under a grey sky over John Matthews' farm. He was used to challenges, but the constant feeling of being under attack was wearing on him. In recent days, the small acts of sabotage on his property seemed coordinated. Every missing tool or broken fence weighed more heavily than it should, and John was convinced that Mark Reynolds was behind it. John was checking the shed where he stored his seeds when he noticed a pickup truck slowing down on the dirt road leading to his farm. This time it wasn't Mark. It was Emily Carter stepping out of the vehicle with a worried expression, holding a folder in one hand and her phone in the other. "John, we need to talk." She walked toward him, the wind tousling her brown hair. "Emily, if you're here to tell me about more problems..." John sighed, leaning against the worn-out fence. She stopped in front of him, her gaze intense. "Not exactly, but there's something you need to know." She opened the folder and pulled out some documents. "Mark has gone further than we thought. He contacted Harvest Hope." John felt his stomach drop. What did he do?" "He tried to get your financing cancelled," Emily explained, her voice tense. "But don't worry, Gregory let me know right away. He's on your side. Still, Mark is determined to make you give up." Anger boiled inside John, but he stayed calm. "Why is he doing this? I just don't understand." Emily hesitated before responding. "Mark wants to protect his image at the bank. If you succeed with the financing, it'll prove he was wrong to treat you the way he did." "It's pure ego, John." John shook his head, incredulous. "Do you think Gregory will keep supporting me despite all this pressure?" "Yes, Gregory has integrity. He's dealt with situations like this before, but we need to be cautious." Emily stepped closer, placing a hand on John's arm. "You have to be prepared for anything that comes your way." While Emily worked to keep John informed and protected, Mark continued his campaign against him. At the bank, Mark called a meeting with the executive board, using John's case as an example of how problematic clients could harm the bank's reputation. He twisted facts, painting John as a farmer who insisted on living beyond his means, omitting his own attempts to sabotage John's success. What Mark didn't count on was Emily secretly recording part of their earlier conversation, where he admitted he was putting Matthews in his place. She knew she might need that evidence to expose Mark. Meanwhile, John tried to restore a sense of normalcy to his farm. He decided to install security cameras around the property, something he had never considered necessary before. That afternoon, as he was adjusting one of the cameras near the main entrance, he heard footsteps. It was his neighbor, Frank Dawson, approaching with a concerned expression. "John, I've been hearing some things in town." Frank began hesitantly. "Things? Like what?" John asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. Frank scratched his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "People are saying you're about to lose the farm, that you're not able to keep going." John closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. He knew exactly where those rumors came from. "Don't believe that, Frank. I'm still here, fighting like I always have." Frank nodded, but his discomfort didn't fade. "I just thought you should know. If you need anything, let me know." John thanked him and returned to work, but the feeling of being surrounded by invisible enemies consumed him. He needed to act before the rumors and sabotage destroyed everything he'd worked for. Later that same night, Emily called John. "John, I've been thinking. We need to turn the tables. If Mark is so intent on ruining you, let's use that against him." "What do you have in mind?" John asked, intrigued. "A community meeting. Invite your neighbors, local suppliers, anyone connected to your farm. Explain your situation. Show them you have nothing to hide. If we gain the community's support, it'll be harder for Mark to continue spreading lies." John considered the idea for a moment. He wasn't the type of person who liked to draw attention to himself, but he knew Emily was right. "All right, let's do it." In the following days, John and Emily worked together to organize the meeting. They rented the local church hall and distributed invitations throughout the town. On the scheduled day, the hall was packed. Farmers, merchants, and even some bank employees attended, curious to hear what John had to say. When he stepped onto the makeshift stage, he felt the weight of everyone's eyes on him. He took a deep breath and began speaking, sharing the story of his farm, the challenges he'd faced, and the Harvest Hope financing that could change everything. "I'm here today to be transparent with you. I know there are rumors about me, and I won't deny that I've faced difficulties, but I'm fighting, and with the help of people like Emily and Gregory, I'm beginning to see light at the end of the tunnel. The audience was silent but attentive. When John finished, one of the farmers in the crowd, an elderly man named Walter Pierce, stood up. "John, I've known your family for decades. I've always seen you as honest, hard-working people. If you need anything, count on me." Others began to speak up, offering moral and practical support. John was moved, but knew there was still a long way to go. As he thanked the community for their support, a familiar figure watched from the back of the hall with a cynical smile: Mark Reynolds. He left before the meeting ended, clearly planning his next move. The church hall was now empty. The lights had been turned off, and the last echoes of the community's support still lingered in John Matthews' mind. He and Emily stood at the entrance, looking out at Cleveland's quiet streets as the cool night wind wrapped around them. "This was a good start, John. You've earned their trust," Emily said with an encouraging smile. John nodded slowly, still processing the wave of solidarity he had experienced. "Yes, but this isn't over. Mark won't give up so easily." Emily looked at him, her eyes serious. "That's why we need to prepare. I have an idea, but you'll need to be brave." "What are you thinking?" John asked, his brow furrowing. "We expose Mark." Her statement hung in the air for a moment. John didn't know exactly what Emily meant, but her tone was resolute. "Expose him? How?" he asked cautiously. Emily took a deep breath before explaining. "I have a recording of Mark admitting that he's sabotaging you. It's the proof we need to bring him down, both at the bank and in the community." John stood silent, considering her words. The idea of using the recording was tempting, but also dangerous. What if he retaliates? That man has power, Emily. He could ruin me, and maybe even you. Emily shrugged. "He's already trying to ruin you, John. The difference now is that we have a chance to fight back." At the same time, Mark Reynolds was preparing his next move. Back at the bank, he called a meeting with the executive board, claiming to have disturbing information about John Matthews. To his surprise, Gregory Shaw from Harvest Hope had also been invited. Mark opened the meeting with confidence, presenting reports and arguments against John's loan approval. He used phrases like high risk and lack of productivity while implying doubts about John's ability to manage his farm. Gregory, who had remained silent until that moment, finally spoke up. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm curious. Why so much effort to discredit someone who isn't even a client of your bank?" The question was a direct hit, and Mark looked visibly unsettled. "I'm just doing my duty to protect the bank's reputation," he replied, trying to regain control. Gregory smiled, but it was a cold smile. "That's interesting because I have here a letter signed by several members of the local community in support of Mr. Matthews. It seems your concern for reputation isn't shared by them." Mark turned pale for a moment but didn't back down. "The local community? With all due respect, Mr. Shaw, we're talking about numbers, not emotions." Gregory placed his hands on the table, leaning forward. "And that's why I reviewed the numbers. John Matthews' business plan is solid. He has the experience and determination to make this work. And by the way, I know you tried to sabotage our financing." The room fell into stunned silence. Mark tried to deny it, but Gregory continued. "I received calls from people at your bank saying you spread rumors about Matthews and even attempted to cancel the loan directly. That's unethical, to say the least." Mark felt the ground shift beneath him. He knew Gregory wasn't bluffing, but he still had one card to play. "You have no proof," Mark retorted, his voice trembling slightly. At that moment, the door to the room opened, and Emily walked in. "Actually, we do." She held a USB drive in one hand and a laptop in the other. With Gregory's permission, she connected the device and played the recording of Mark admitting to his efforts to sabotage John. The expressions of the board members ranged from shock to disapproval. Mark tried to interrupt, but the recording spoke for itself. "This is unacceptable," one of the directors said. "Reynolds, you've compromised the integrity of the bank." Mark attempted to argue, but his words were drowned out by the indignation in the room. Emily stared at him firmly. "I told you, you wouldn't get away with this. People like you need to be held accountable." While Mark faced the consequences of his actions, John received an unexpected visit at his farm. Gregory arrived in his truck, bringing a surprise. "Mr. Matthews, I've got something for you." He handed John an envelope. Inside was a revised loan agreement, with even better terms than the original. We've decided to increase the loan amount. Your story inspired many people, including those in our organization. We want you to have all the resources you need to rebuild your farm. John felt tears welling up in his eyes. He shook Gregory's hand firmly, his voice thick with emotion. I don't even know how to thank you. Gregory smiled. Just make your farm thrive. That's all we want. That night, as John carefully reviewed the documents, Emily called him. How are you feeling? She asked. Relieved. For the first time, I feel like I have a real chance, John replied, his voice full of emotion. You deserve this, John. Emily paused before continuing. And Mark is no longer a problem. He's been removed from the bank. It seems people finally saw him for who he really is. John remained silent for a moment, feeling the weight lift from his shoulders. Emily, you saved my farm. I'll never forget what you've done for me. I didn't do it alone. You fought, John, and this is just the beginning. While hope was being restored for John, Mark was silently plotting his revenge, determined not to go down without a fight. John's story was far from over, and the final challenge was just around the corner. The sun rose over John Matthews' farm, casting its warm glow on fields that now symbolized a fresh start. He had woken up early, as usual, but this time with renewed energy. With the financing secured and the community's support, the installation of the new irrigation system was in full swing. But as John knew all too well, peace rarely lasted long. As he walked across the property, he noticed something that made him stop. Fresh tire tracks at the entrance to his farm. His heart raced. He followed the tracks to the shed where he kept his tools. When he opened the doors, he was met with devastation. Tools were scattered and damaged, sacks of seeds torn apart, and the newly delivered irrigation equipment destroyed. John clenched his fists, feeling anger bubbling to the surface. He knew exactly who was behind this. That same morning, Emily Carter received an unexpected call from a colleague at the bank. Emily, you won't believe this. Mark Reynolds was seen at a bar in town last night, talking about how Matthews hasn't won yet. I think he's up to something. Emily immediately tried calling John, but the line was busy. Worried, she grabbed her car keys and drove straight to the farm. When she arrived, she found John standing in the shed, staring at the destruction. John, what happened here? She asked, already suspecting the answer. Mark, he's trying to destroy what I've built. John turned to Emily, his expression hardened. I won't let him get away with this. Emily placed a hand on John's shoulder, trying to calm him. I understand your anger, but we need to be smart. This is vandalism and we need to report it. John nodded, but his mind was already racing. He knew Mark wouldn't stop easily. That night, while John and Emily sat in his kitchen discussing the next steps, an unusual noise caught their attention. Footsteps. They rushed to the back door and saw a hooded figure running through the fields. John shouted, but the person disappeared into the darkness. Inside, they found a rock on the kitchen floor with a note tied to it. If you keep going, this will get worse. Quit while you can. Emily picked up the note, her face pale with concern. He's threatening you, John. This is serious. John took a deep breath, struggling to stay composed. This just proves I'm on the right path. He's scared. And you know what? I won't back down. The next morning, Emily and John went to the local police station to file a report. The sheriff, David Parker, was a robust, practical man who was well versed in both sides of the justice system. This is serious, John. If Mark Reynolds is behind this, we need concrete evidence, Parker said, as he flipped through the documents Emily had brought. Emily explained the history of sabotage and mentioned the recording of Mark's confession. The sheriff promised to investigate, but warned them the process could take time. In the meantime, I'll have extra patrols in the area, Parker assured them. The weeks that followed were tense but productive. With the help of friends and neighbors, John repaired the damage to his farm and completed the installation of the irrigation system. The first rain after the installation felt like a sign that things were finally turning in his favor. Still, the shadow of Mark Reynolds lingered. He had disappeared from town, but John knew the threat wasn't entirely gone. The turning point came on a rainy morning when Sheriff Parker arrived at John's door with a satisfied smile. We got him, John. Got who? John asked, confused. Mark Reynolds. He tried to break into Harvest Hope's office in Columbus. The security cameras caught everything. Parker handed John a report. He confessed to the vandalism on your farm. Apparently, he thought that sabotaging your financing would save his reputation at the bank. John felt a wave of relief and exhaustion wash over him. Does this mean it's over? Parker nodded. At least for him. Now you can focus on what really matters. The following months were a time of recovery and growth for John. His farm thrived like never before, and he quickly gained a reputation as one of the most innovative farmers in the region. Emily remained by his side, no longer just a friend, but part of something greater they had built together. One evening, as the sun set over the lush fields, John turned to Emily. "I never thought I'd make it here, and I couldn't have done it without you." Emily smiled. "You would have made it, John. I just helped open a few doors." "You did more than that. You saved my life." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the soothing sound of water flowing through the new irrigation system. To John, that sound symbolized renewal, resilience, and triumph. And for the first time in a long while, he felt he was exactly where he was meant to be.